Good morning. Good to see everyone here this morning. Josh had asked me last week, or maybe even it was right before that, if I would do his class today. I will let you know that I've been coming over about a 3-week coughing fits for the last Sundays. When we were in Tennessee, when we was in Alabama, I wasn't even able to sing a song at worship. I lip synced, and that got me coughing. So anyway, last Sunday night, I made it through 2 songs before I was just out. And so if I start coughing all of a sudden, I've got a whole pocket full of cough drops here. So if I have to pop one in my mouth, which I've got one in there right now, just bear with me, and we'll move on. So anyway, we are in Ezekiel, and we're going to be looking at chapters 4 and 5 today. Before we begin, let's go to Heavenly Father in prayer. And Kevin, would you lead us in a prayer, please? Amen. Okay, and Ezekiel, about a year ago, I just decided, I wanted to do my own study on Ezekiel. And I've studied him a number of times before. I've taught class on him a few times at other places and everything. And Ezekiel He's an interesting character, I guess is one way to put it. And what God asked him to do. When I study the prophets, I'm thankful that God never asked me to be a prophet. Because some of the stuff that he asked them to do was hard. Hosea, what did he ask him to do? You go marry a woman that's a prostitute. And she's going to leave you, but you got to go back and get her back and everything. Jeremiah, the things that Jeremiah had to do. But I think Ezekiel's got some of the weirdest, to me, and oddest with God trying to make a point. And these 2 chapters that we're going to look at today are a couple of the worst ones. But it's not the worst thing that I think he had to face as a prophet of God. I think the worst one in my mind, anyway, was a little bit later on. We're going to be studying about where his wife dies, and God tells him he cannot mourn her. And the point he's trying to make is, I'm not going to mourn over Israel. And he mentions in this passage he has no pity at this time. But to be asked to not mourn the death of your wife, how do you do that? And so again, these prophets were asked to do some very, very difficult things. This one right here today is God's got him doing all kinds of little play type things, is what it seems like. Now, the first one is taking a tile and creating a picture or a model of Jerusalem, and then building all these little advances against it and all that, and getting an iron plate, and then coming up on it, after it. And let me tell you, first of all, that some people believe this is still part of his vision. It doesn't appear to me to be part of the vision. It seems to be something that's real. But it's also hard for me to understand exactly how he did what he had to do for the length of time that he was supposed to, which we'll get into a little bit right after this. So if you look in Ezekiel, keep in mind of what the prophet's trying to tell the people is that the Babylonian captivity happened in three stages, okay? The first one started in 606 BC, and then 597, and the final one was in 586, okay? So at the time that Ezekiel is writing this, Ezekiel was in one of the first deportations. And so a lot of what he's going to be talking about has not happened yet. And so these deportations into Babylon didn't happen all at once until the final one. And so what he's looking at in this model right here, in this very first part of it, is dealing with something that has not happened yet, okay, from the time that he's writing. As closely as I can tell, it hasn't, because it wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense to do it if it had already happened. So he says in chapter 4, verse 1, "You also, son of man, take a clay tablet and lay it before you and portray on it a city, Jerusalem. Lay siege against it, build a siege wall against it, and heap up a mound against it, set camps against it also, and place battering rams against it all around. Moreover, take for yourself an iron plate and set it as an iron wall between you and the city. Set your face against it, and it shall be besieged, and you shall lay siege against it. This will be a sign to the house of Israel." And so I would love to see what this model looked like, if indeed it was reality and not a vision. And again, I don't think it was a vision. I think this is something that he did. But you can see now he's trying to make a point of something that's going to happen. Some of these people are already in captivity, but most of the Jews at this time are denying that anything's going to happen to Jerusalem. It's God's city. They're God's people. They feel safe. And Jeremiah dealt with some of the same things. And when we do get in a little bit further talking about it, keep in mind that Israel has already been in captivity with Assyrians, and for over 100 years. Okay, part of this prophecy is including Israel too. Okay, and not just Jerusalem, not just Judah. But the brunt of it is Judah, because they hadn't gone in captivity yet. And I think that plays a role in understanding some of these numbers that come up. Josh made the point last week that when we're studying any kind of apocalyptic literature, and although this part of it may not necessarily be considered apocalyptic, when we were looking at last week of the four creatures with the four faces and the wheels, and you know, and some people say, and see, there's aliens, and those aliens came to Earth. So aliens have been to Earth before. And all, oh no, and is that exactly what it's, I don't know. But people want to take every little aspect of something and make it mean something. And that's difficult to do sometimes. It's difficult to do with numbers, and it's difficult to do with the numbers that he's talking about. So you got this picture of this man, and he's built this model, okay? And he's got this steel plate, and he's laying siege to it. And, you know, I picture the way kids sometimes, you know, they'll get their little army guys, and they'll set them up and everything, and then they'll, boom, you know, and make a big noise, and they'll go away. That's sort of what I picture in my mind with this model, and with him with this big steel, you know, whatever it was. Some people say that it was probably a cooking utensil, like almost like a big frying pan that they used for making their bread and other foods with and everything. I don't know. I just know it was an iron plate, according to this. And he's laying siege to this town. When you turn over and look at beginning in verse 4, and this is a difficult part to me of completely understanding, so I'm going to tell you sort of how I view. Y'all, if y'all have other ideas about it, let me know. I will tell you this stuff in my head's affected my ears, and already I didn't hear very well, so you need to speak up if you make a statement or something, and of course, not like usual, I'll probably walk back towards you wherever it is. But anyway, it says, lie also on your left side, and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel upon it. According to the number of days that you lie on it, you shall bear their iniquity. For I've laid on you the years of their iniquity according to the number of days, 390 days. You shall bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. Now, he's talking here, I think, primarily about Israel, not Judah. Okay? And now, when you look at those numbers, he says right here that the days equal years. Okay? So they are representing something at this point. But Israel has not been in captivity for 390 years, right? And so you got to sort of account that, or how does that work? But let me read the next one. It says, and when you have completed them, lie again on your right side, and you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have laid on you a day for each year. Now, one of the reasons some people say that this is a vision is because of pretty much the impossibility of laying here on your side for 390 days, and then laying again on the other one for 40 days, you know. We're not told how he did it. To me, still, I believe that he's trying to make a point to Judah and to Israel, which is already in captivity. He's trying to make a point to them about what's going to happen. And it may be that there's a certain period of the day that he's doing this, because he's got to get up if it's real. He's a person just like we were. Okay, he has no special powers to not eat, to not walk around, to not do certain things. I don't know, because it's not revealed to us. But look at those numbers again. 390 and 40. Okay, 40, what would come to your mind 40 years? Is what? Wandering in the wilderness. When the spies went in, they were going to spy out the land for 40 days. And when they came back, only Caleb And Joshua said, we can take this land. The rest of them said, no, we can't. The people are too big, but it's everything God said it was, but we can't take it. And so God said, okay, what you're going to do for each day that you were gone, that the spies were gone, Israel will wander in the wilderness for 40, and that was 40 days. So for 40 years. And during that time, what was going to happen? Is what? Okay, that generation would be gone. Anybody over the age of 20, he says, is going to die during these next 40 years. Okay? And we see big hunks of people during that time that are dying because of disobedience and everything. Okay, so 40 sticks in your mind and you say, okay, that's really, really good. But what about the 390? What's that got to do? Well, if you add those numbers together, you got 430. What does 430 bring to mind? About the Egyptian captivity. We're told they were there for 430 years. Right? And it was a captivity. And later prophets and other prophets will talk about Egypt when they're not talking about Egypt. But they're talking about Egypt in the sense of a captivity coming. The same way that the term Babylon is used. It does not always mean Babylon. Sometimes it refers to captivity. Okay? And so I think, in my mind anyway, what God is trying to get across to them, that understand that this captivity in Egypt included all of Israel. Okay? And this captivity in Babylon, along with, because Babylon is going to overtake Assyria, it's going to include all of Israel. Now, for these people, for those in Judah, it's only going to be 70 years. It's not the years that matter, I don't think. It's not the numbers that matter, other than the fact he's saying, just like in the days of when you were in Egypt, that you were there for 430 years. What he's saying, the captivity that's about to happen is all-inclusive for all of Israel. And so the numbers then, if that's right, and that's just my view, there's a lot of other views on these numbers. So I'm not saying I'm right, but that's one that makes the most sense to me. There's some people want to add a chronological number to it. Well, where do you begin that number? And so you come up with all these places that you could begin, and at the end of 390 years, or even 430 years, there's nothing. You know, it's sort of like these these little signs you see on this day and this year at this site, so-and-so happened. And somebody will come up and put a sign on this day, and so-and-so year, nothing happened here. You know. And so it's similar to that. So anyway, that's just sort of my thoughts on the years, or the time that he's laying on the side. We're not told everything about what's going to happen during this period of time. How he is to lay, is it a continuous 24/7 thing that he's supposed to lay there? We're not told. We're just told he's to lay there. You know, what do we do with school now? How many days have you got to have? What, 280? Yeah. Does that mean 24/7? No, but I mean, maybe for teachers in your head it does. Yeah, Robert?
I was just reading part of this description about Ezekiel, and it said that he also told stories with symbolic meanings, performed symbolic actions,
Yeah, and
It's
it,
this acting out that you're talking about.
and it is symbolic of what's going to happen.
Right.
Exactly.
It's probably not all day.
Yeah. Yeah, and so again, we have to sort of consider what's told and what's not told, and then from that just sort of come to a conclusion. And like I say, this is my take on it. Somebody else may have another take that's just as strong, but it makes more sense to me than most of the chronological things. Just a second, I'll get you. I want to say Jeff Foxworthy back here. Steve.
I think your point is made by the scriptures. The scriptures turn around and say clearly that the reason for doing this sign is for their iniquity.
Mm-hmm.
And we know it doesn't, we can't figure out what the 390 and the 40 are. There's several different methods that people have used. I'm not even concerned with that. What I am concerned with is iniquity. And we know how much iniquity has been in the state of Israel, the nation of Israel, going all the way back to Egypt.
Yeah.
So it's for their iniquity that this is being demonstrated to them. You also said we've already gone part of the way already into captivity, Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Judah is coming fast on its heels. So yes, because of their iniquity, all Israel is the reason for this sign coming.
Yeah, and that's a very important point, I think, of this. And what he means by that is the punishment that's going to come for their sins.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you're right. We don't know whether it's literal or not, but I think there is also the potential that it could be literal in that this would have to be something that's miraculous. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this would show that this person is speaking on behalf of God, not that he's just laying down and doing strange things, but, he's able to defy some of the things that would potentially happen for laying there 390
Yeah.
days. And, I think it's interesting too because God says in verse 8 that he's going to place cords upon him that's going to hold him there. And so again, maybe this is something where he comes out and those cords are placed every day, but I think there's also
That possibility,
that
yeah.
he was there for 390 days, as odd as that is,
Mm-hmm.
and it was God working through him that he was able to do something.
Yeah, and that's another very good point, because what did God say in Deuteronomy or Moses when they were getting ready? Moses was giving his last speech to the Israelites. What did he say about their clothes in 40 years? Nothing worn out. No shoes were worn out. I got clothes I was wearing 40 years ago, but they look like it. Barely shaking her head. Yeah. When I met her, I was wearing those 2-inch platform shoes from back in the 70s, and she still liked me. But she wanted me to get rid of those shoes as quick as I could. I don't understand it, but anyway, but that was miraculous that nothing happened to their clothes. So, that point that Bryce made is another very real aspect of it. And that would, again, show that this is from God. Probably more so than just a guy coming out and laying out on his side for a few hours a day or whatever. And so, the point, though, is made, again, that it's symbolic to show them what's going to happen, because the people in Judah at that time refused to believe that they would go into captivity. And definitely nothing was going to happen to Jerusalem, because that was God's city. Okay, and it's just like in Matthew chapter 24. That's a place where people go, the premillennialists, that's their playground area and everything. But he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And when he talks about and he tells the apostles that are with him privately that there's not going to be one stone left turned on top of the other, looking at the temple, they can't imagine that. And you think us today, we know there's a lot going on in our country, but because we've lived here peacefully for all these years, we can't imagine something that's going to destroy our country. But it's in God's hands. And so again, keep in mind that the point, and that Steve made too, is so important, is that is for the iniquity, to show the iniquity or the punishment that's coming because of their sins. Okay, and then he begins to talk about food, and this was another one that and finally Ezekiel said on this one, excuse me, Lord, let's work on this one a little bit, in essence. But he talks about in verse 9 of taking things like wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millets, and spelt, put them in one vessel and make bread of yourselves. During the number of days that you lie on your side, 390 days you shall eat it. And your food which you eat shall be by weight, 20 shekels a day. From time to time you shall eat it. You shall also drink water by measure, 1/6 of a hin. And from time to time you shall drink, and you shall eat it as barley cakes, and bake it using the fuel of human waste. And that's the point where Ezekiel says, whoa, let's sort of reconsider this, Lord, which he does. But again, what's the point of this? What's the point of all these ingredients he's talking about? Are they normal ingredients for bread? Yeah, pretty much, as Peggy said, it's the bread of poor people. What you have is going away. Even your bread that you have. Now, keep in mind that later on, and that's why Jeremiah says, you go into captivity and build your life in the new place that you're going to be in. Because some of these people that were taken into captivity, at the end of these 70 years, they had jobs, they had families, they had homes. Some of them were well off and everything. And we see that by the fact that when they get the opportunity to come back to Jerusalem, they don't want to go. They don't want to leave where they are because they have families, they know their people, they know their neighbors, and all of this. And so I think what he's really talking about is this the early beginning of this captivity is here what's going to happen. Okay? Even in Assyria, there's a lot of the Jews that they didn't die, not all of them. Okay? He is going to talk about when he cuts his hair a little bit more about that particular thing of what's going to happen. And again, is it a literal 1/3 or whatever? But the idea is that when this siege starts, and when a siege was made against a walled city, there's nothing those people in that city could do. They couldn't get more food in. They couldn't go out to where the crops would have been growing or whatever. They were stuck inside this wall. And when the siege was laid by the Romans in AD 70, some of the very same things that he talks about here happened there. The idea of parents eating their children. As repulsive as that is, God makes it very clear that this is not going to be a happy days, okay? This is not going to be your happy time when we go through what is there. And again, the people refuse. Remember what God told Ezekiel at the very beginning? I want you to preach what I tell you to preach But what are the people going to do? They're not going to listen to you. You know, and I'm thinking, okay, like, you know, I mean, how'd you like to have a job that says, I want you to spend all this time as what we call today an influencer. But nobody's going to listen to you. How much effort are you going to put into that? If you already know nobody's going to listen to me anyway. But you know, you do it. God told him, you're going to do this. And pretty much the same thing was told to Jeremiah. So keep in mind that these two are contemporary with each other. They're talking to, pretty much writing to the same people, but with somewhat different messages. Okay. And so he says, so shall the children of Israel eat their defiled bread among the Gentiles, where I will drive them out. Now, the other part of this is not just the bread situation, but that because the temple will be gone, all of that will be gone, the priests will be gone, there's nobody that can sanctify anything. And I think what he's talking about here, you'll eat your bread with the Gentiles, your defiled bread, which has not been able to be blessed, which has not been able to be dealt with the priest or anything. You're just going to be eating bread. And to the Jews, that was a terrible thing to think about. Rachel?
It totally explains his reaction in verse 14, where he's like, I've never been defiled. He's like,
Yeah.
He's like, I have been trying to keep the law. Why would I have to do this?
Uh-huh.
It's scary.
And that's the point. And I think God is trying to make, and for the people would have possibly known that Ezekiel is somebody who has stuck by the rules of law that were given down by God. And you know, he says, like she said in verse 14, "Ah, Lord, indeed I've never been defiled myself from my youth till now." He he goes in 15 though, and this is where God relents on the fuel for the fire. Then he said to me, "See, I'm giving you cow dung instead of human waste, and you shall prepare your bread over it." Still not the best, you know, I mean, you go to the HEB and say, "You got some cow dung? I got a barbecue coming up, you know." And I know everybody wants me to cook their hamburgers and their brisket and all that stuff with the flavor of cow dung. You know, I mean, it's still not good. Okay, it's still not a good situation. And so again, he says, "Moreover to me, son of man, surely I will cut off the supply of bread in Jerusalem. They shall eat bread by weight and with anxiety, and shall drink water and by measure and dread, that they may lack bread and water and be dismayed with one another and waste away because of their iniquity." And there's that term again. And so there's so much in this first part of this that's just us knowing the history of what's going to happen make it a lot easier for us to understand than them who didn't believe the prophets anyway. So this guy, you know, this Ezekiel guy, he's a nut, you know, and so people continued on. They thought the same thing about Jeremiah, and there were other quote prophets of God that argued against Jeremiah, and that didn't go well. Rachel?
I was just going to say that you see in Ezekiel and all the other prophets, God making a very significant to them contrast about how serious sin is to God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a way he's showing Ezekiel, look, this is very serious. This is how seriously this is to me, in a context that Ezekiel could understand. I mean, you look at Hosea with his wife having to go back constantly and get her.
Uh-huh.
I believe that's the right prophet. I could be incorrect. But he's trying to bring that to light to Ezekiel. Be like, look at the weight of this. This is a serious thing in a context that Ezekiel would understand. Like, breaking the law is serious.
Yeah, and it has such meaning for us today. And that's why I like studying the Old Testament, is because what we learn from the Old Testament is the nature of God, and we're told that he does not change. Okay? His nature then is the same nature he has today. And that means I want things done the way I want things done, and punishment will come to those who fight against me. So keep that in mind. Real quick, because the next chapter deals with him cutting his hair off, and he has to divide it up into thirds by weight. Okay, it wouldn't take me very long, cut my butt, but it was his beard and his hair and all that, and then he was to do certain things with certain parts, thirds of that hair. But the key to what he's trying to do, here's where he says, a third of you are going to die, a third of you are going to be taken into captivity, the other third, okay. I've set her, in verse 5, the Lord says, this is Jerusalem. That's crucial right there. He said, this is Jerusalem that he's talking about, okay? Because the people do not want to believe that this is going to happen. And I have set her in the midst of the nations and the countries around her. She's rebelled against my judgments by doing wickedness more than the nations, and against my statutes more than the countries that are all around her. For they have refused my judgments, and they have not walked in my statutes. And so he says down at verse 11, starting there, therefore, as I live, says the Lord, surely because you have defiled my sanctuary with all your detestable things and with all your abominations, therefore I will diminish you. My eye will not spare, nor will I have any pity. And I mentioned that a little bit earlier. 1/3 of you shall die of the pestilence. Okay, that's what the division of the hair is dealing with. And be consumed with famine in your midst. 1/3 shall fall by the sword all around you. And I will scatter another third to all the winds, and I will draw out a sword after them. But notice what he says in verse 13. Thus shall my anger be spent, and I will cause my fury to rest upon them, and I will be avenged. Now, there's always some kind of hope in the messages that come across, and I think this is a big message of hope. This is going to happen, but understand my anger is not forever, not at this point. And there is going to be that remnant that will come back. But again, as I mentioned earlier, not everybody wants to come back because they have built homes, they have jobs, they have families in this land that they were carried away to. And so we see the same thing happening during the time of Alexander the Great and people being spread out. And keep in mind, that's part of God's plan for Christians today. In Acts, we read about them being dispersed, and then they started sharing the gospel in other places. So all of this is God's plan. Sorry I had to rush through that last little bit of it, but I appreciate your attention, appreciate your comments. There's always something to think about when you look at this. And I gave you my take on some of them. We heard some others. So I encourage you to continue to study it on your own, too. It's a fantastic a book, and one that reminds me again that I'm glad I was never called to be a prophet like these people were a prophet. Thank you.